Hello everyone and welcome. For this project I'm turning a piece of maple, a bow blank that I purchased online, Craft Supplies USA. It's been drying for a while. I bought it when it was not completely dry. So I've had it for several months, waiting for it to dry before I could use it. So that day is today. So attach the faceplate, put the tailstock up and in place. And I'm going to be doing something a little bit different than I normally do. Normally I would use the bandsaw to cut off the corners and then true it up on the side. This time I'm going to be turning it from the bottom and around. Starting off with a Carter & Son bowl gouge. This is my larger bowl gouge. All the links and everything are in the video description to the tools and products that I use. So just taking my time and trying to get around that corner and get a nice curve on the bowl. I often get a lot of questions about how many times I stop to sharpen. This one I probably stopped 5 times to sharpen. This was very dense, hard maple. So continuing rounding the corner just from the other side, from the top down. And one thing I've learned in my 3 or so years of turning is to be patient. I wasn't always patient, but with wood turning, if you're not patient, the outcome probably won't be the finish or come out like you like, and also for safety reasons. Now, if somebody would have told me that when I started, I would have agreed, but I learn by doing, so sometimes you gotta learn the hard way. Not that I've ever been hurt wood turning. I mean, I've smashed a finger, little things, but nothing major. So you can see how well that bowl gouge is cutting there on that cut. Also different than usual on this project, I'm going to be using a tenon instead of a mortise. Sometimes it's good to try different things. At least I have found. It helps my skills and helps me learn. So the cut that Carter & Son bowl gouge gives is phenomenal in my opinion. I'm not associated with them or anything. I know I talk about them a lot, but they're just great products. I'd rather have really good products and have only a few rather than a lot of cheap ones, personally. So this is the smaller version of my Carter & Son bowl gouge. And just starting by taking some off of the top. I switched to the larger bowl gouge here. Seemed to do a better job. And as I mentioned, this was pretty dense, pretty hard maple. And to save a little bit of time, I am using a Forstner bit on the drill chuck and hogging out a little bit of material there. And then back to the Carter and Son bowl gouge. At this point I had the lathe speed up to around 1,000 RPM. I know it seems like a high RPM without the tailstock pulled up, but I made sure it was very secure and tested it before. I didn't just crank it up to 1,000. Switching out the tool rest now for the interior curved tool rest. And then back to the bowl gouge. Story of the day, the bowl gouge. So if you haven't already, now would be a great time to like and subscribe. The goal is to get to 25,000 subscribers by Halloween. So if you haven't yet, please consider subscribing. Thank you very much. So there's a few cracks that I had to deal with, and I decided to use a Starbond CA glue in black. I often get asked to why I use black and not clear and sawdust. I personally like to see sort of the veins of the bowl sometimes. I think it gives character instead of hiding the flaws. I mean, I don't necessarily think of them as flaws, but this is how the tree grew and how it dried. So after adding the Starbond, then I'm going to make some final cuts to the inside. Well, these aren't the final cuts, but we're getting close. When I get to this point, I usually take lighter passes to make sure I don't join the funnel club. And I have enough wall thickness to work with to get the final thickness down to what I want. So here I'm using a cutout I made on my Glowforge. If you want to check out the Glowforge, you can save up to $500 by using the PF Woodturning link in the video description. The Glowforge can do so much. You've probably heard of it by now, but if you want to check it out, there is a link in the video description. So getting the circle to the right size, checking for fit, and then mixing up some total boat. I'm using the medium 2:1, and then I'm going to use some pigment powder as well. And for those of you with a keen eye, the Glowforge cutout that I used, that you see in there, is a little bit different than the one I showed taking the tape off of. I decided to go with one with the tree. The other one was just the moon and the moose. So Midnight Diamond Blue there, along with some sparkles for the pigment. few more sparkles. And then the pour. Because the resin cures and dries and shrinks, I do cover the whole thing to make sure I don't have to take too much thickness off the bottom and the sides to make it flush. And there it is the next day. I let it dry overnight. If you haven't worked with resin yet and you've been thinking about it, Total Boat has some great maker kits available if you go online. And it's very easy to work with. It's not intimidating. And they make smaller kits too, so you don't have to buy gallons if you don't want to. So just very thin cuts. And I'm using an Easy Wood Tools negative rake on the resin part. And waiting to reveal the mousse. If you can think of a name for the mousse, I'll pick the best one and send you out a little something. So type a name down in the comments for Mr. Mousse, and I'll pick the best one next week. So for the resin part, I wet sanded from 400 up to 2000. I think it was 2000. The wood part I sanded to 400. And then after sanding, I use the denatured alcohol to clean the surface of any dust. And then one final sand after the denatured alcohol with 400 grit. And use the air compressor. And now for the sanding sealer. One coat of sanding sealer. And I let that dry. And then I move on to the finishing, which is the Axe Woodturning paste, which you'll see in a minute. Less than a minute, actually. The amazement of video editing. So denibbing it with a Scotch-Brite pad and then on to the Axe Woodturning paste. There is a very nice discount code if you use the link in the description, or check out the code and go to Axe website and save yourself some money. So it's as easy to use as it looks. This is not the power of video editing, except it is sped up a little bit. But nothing else. This is, you use it, you buff it, you wipe it in, buff it off, and that's it. And this is the Axe polishing paste, which gives it its final finish. So after the Axe Woodturning paste and polish, it is 95% done. Because I used a tenon this time, I do still have to take off the tenon, but showing you some close-ups there. And I have it reverse mounted in a Longworth chuck to take off the tenon. And this was probably the main reason for me that I usually use a mortise instead of a tenon. I like to be finished once the wood turning paste or whatever finish I'm using is done. But sometimes nice to try different things. and sanding the bottom flat before I use my branding iron. This new Armor workbench and clamps works great for this. I've linked them in the video description as well. Some final sanding on the very bottom with 220 grit. And then the branding iron. A little bit of sanding sealer. And some close-ups. Don't go anywhere yet. There'll be some beauty shots